Welcome to today's author event. My name is Emily McAvoy and I am the Teen Services Coordinator for St. Louis County Library. Our event today is produced in partnership with HEC Media. Our event bookseller is The Novel Neighbor, an indie bookstore in Webster Groves with the best selection of young adult literature in the area. You can order a copy of our featured book at thenovelneighbor.com, and we so appreciate you supporting our author and our indie bookstore partner with your book purchase. Our author today is Adrienne Young. Adrienne is a New York Times, USA Today, and Indie List bestselling author of the Fable duology and the Sky and the Deep duology. Her newest title is The Last Legacy, which takes place in the same world as the Fable duology. Hi, Adrienne, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. Before we get started, could you tell us a little bit about The Last Legacy?
Yeah, The Last Legacy is actually a standalone spinoff of the Fable series, which has come out, both books have come out over the last year. And this is a seafaring world that, the story is mostly taking place on the water, but in The Last Legacy, we're exploring kind of the dark corners of one of the big port cities. And it's with a family called the Roths, and they're kind of an organized crime family who make gemstone fakes and leak them into the trading circuit. And we see a little bit of that in Fable and Namesake, but in The Last Legacy, we really get to dive deep into their world and kind of their operations. And the story follows a young girl named Bryn, who has been raised by a great aunt in another town to kind of protect her from the dangers of the family as she's growing up. But on her 18th birthday, she's summoned home by her uncle Henrik, who's the patriarch of the family, to kind of come and take her place in the family. And so we kind of see her adventure, I guess you could say, in kind of discovering her long lost family and figuring out her place within it and kind of trying to take over her mom's place in the family as well. And things get pretty interesting.
Exactly. So you've created this entire world. It started with Fable, Namesake, and now we see even a different part of it in The Last Legacy. What inspired you to create this whole different world?
A lot of people refer to it as like a pirate book. It's really not a pirate book, but it's very much seafaring. So there's a lot of hallmarks to this like seafaring fantasy kind of world that we've seen before. But I think the thing that intrigued me the most about this world when I was creating it was the underwater aspect, where a lot of the economy and trade of the world is built upon gemstones. And the gemstones are dredged or like excavated off of coral reefs underwater. And so the main character of Fable and Namesake, her name is Fable, and she's a dredger. So she free dives to dredge gemstones from the reefs. And that's kind of how, like, the backbone of the world. And as I was developing that aspect, I feel like that's where a lot of the inspiration came from and kind of like broke open a lot of other aspects of the world that were kind of unexpected for me or kind of make the world unique.
Did you always set out to just have it be seafaring and not have that more pirate aspect to it?
Yeah, I think, I didn't even know when I first started working on the book how much of it would take place on a ship. So I didn't really approach it with pirates in mind. And so it really kind of developed more in this trade world, like maritime trade and the port cities and who controls the trade and, what are they trading and what kind of goods and, in our own world, like what kind of time period or technological advances would have been at this time. So it's very much a fantasy world, but I feel like there are a lot of things that are rooted in our own kind of world history.
Yeah. So in The Last Legacy, we get to see a different part of this world. So in the duology, Fable duology, it took place more in the Narrows, and now we're more in the unnamed sea. Mm-hmm. So when you were writing Fable and Namesake, did you know that you always wanted to go back and explore this part of the world?
I knew pretty early on when I was writing Fable, there's a moment in that book where Fable spots some gem fakes in a merchant's house, and there's a merchant trading emeralds, and she notices because of her own ability with gemstones, she notices that some of them are fakes and draws attention to that. And it immediately sparked this idea in me of where do the fakes come from? How are they made? Who makes them? And like what are the implications of that in the world on a larger scale. And so this kind of idea of somebody making fake gemstones got into my head and just grew and grew and grew in the back of my mind while I was working on Fable and Namesake. And this whole kind of story started spinning about them and where they were. And as the story started unfolding, it really became clear to me that these people probably live in Bastion. They probably are really crooked people and have like a lot of people in their pocket and do a lot of shady things. And so this idea of a crime family really started, coming together.
Yeah. And it really, it's like, I don't want to say it's the Sopranos on the sea, but they are very much like they have their ways about them.
Yeah.
If you watch
Yeah.
their movies or TV, you will recognize, okay, this is a
Yeah.
crime family.
It's very true.
When you're writing, are any of the characters more like you? Would you say there's a particular one, or do they all kind of have parts of you in them?
I think it's very true that I write myself into all of my characters, even my villains. I feel like I kind of drop little pieces of myself or my perspective in there. But for this series, between Fable Namesake and The Last Legacy, I feel like the character that's most like me is probably West. And he is one of the main characters in Fable and Namesake. We don't see him on the page in The Last Legacy, but I feel like I identify with him the most, I think, of all of the characters. And just like his personality, the way he sees things, his reactions to things. I felt really connected to him whenever I was writing him.
Is there anyone in your life or anyone in particular that inspired Bryn in The Last Legacy?
Um, I mean, myself for sure. I think that a lot of Bryn's journey and like her character arc is really about taking hold of her own destiny. She's kind of been raised away from the family in part to protect her, but also she's been raised kind of in high society with the intent or like the idea um, on her great aunt and her uncle's part that she will kind of be able to bridge the gap between the family and their reputation and the more high society, more respected like rungs of society and the guilds. And so, she's been raised almost like for this very specific purpose. And then when she actually arrives to the rocks and kind of starts finding her place among them, she realizes that they have almost every part of her life planned out. And there's a lot of expectations, even down to what she's being told to wear. And so, like, I feel like I wrote a lot of my own experience into Bryn and kind of the inner journey that I went through at becoming a woman from girlhood and kind of realizing just how much pressure is put, especially on women to, how they look and how they act and, what role they're supposed to play and all of these things. So I feel like so much of her internal monologue and her experience was inspired by a lot of that stuff. And of course, there's so many things about her that aren't like me or her experience that isn't like mine. But I feel like that's really kind of the through line, like the undertow of her story. And that was very much something I felt I'd experienced in my own life.
All right. Yeah, I feel like it's a thread that a lot of readers will identify with when reading The Last Legacy. So The Last Legacy is a standalone. This is Bryn's story, and it will be the only book in her story.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought about going back again to this world in another book?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly feel like I could write in this world forever. And I've never felt like that about a project before. Whereas, things that came up before, that I worked on before I was published, or my first two books, they felt very contained. Like I knew exactly what story I was trying to tell. In this world, I stumble across things all the time that I'm like, oh, I want to follow that person, or I want to know about that corner of the world, or that shop, that street down there that she just passed. Like, there's just so many things that I would love to explore in this world. I would be very happy doing that.
Wonderful. Yeah. I would love for you to go back to it too. It's a wonderful world. So a little bit of a turn. So the covers of your books, they are all very dynamic, especially the covers of Fable and Namesake and the Fable duology.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get to give notes on the covers, or are you as awestruck as the rest of us when they come out?
Both. I am like, so all of my covers, not just the Fable series, but also The Girl the Sea Gave Back and Sky in the Deep, have these brilliant, striking, amazing covers. I love them so much. And I feel like I got so lucky because not only do I have an amazing cover designer who's worked on my books, her name's Carrie Resnick. But so not only have I been lucky to have her, but I also am so lucky to work with a publishing team that is so collaborative and really interested in everybody like working together and being happy with the final product. And a lot of authors are not afforded that. So I recognize how lucky I am to have that. But kind of what the process is we talk about the story, we talk about the themes and kind of the aesthetic of a story and the world. And even this one was different than Fable and Namesake and all of that. So we kind of like talk about all these like little nitty gritty details. We throw them all like in an email. And then once the cover designer has kind of brainstormed and they've chatted about things, then she usually will have like an idea or some kind of concept, and we'll like talk about it. I like love her ideas, and I've really gotten to the point now where I'm just like, just do whatever, like go forth and do whatever. But she just has such an amazing eye and imagination for this kind of stuff and ability to conceptualize these things. So then from there, like once we have kind of like looked at the concept and we've gotten excited about it, then they move forward, and there might be like little tweaks after it comes back. But I'm always so in love with these covers that I might have like, I don't think I had like a single note on this one. Like on The Last Legacy, I'm like, yes, it's beautiful. Like I think we played with the color of her dress a couple times to see, but I think we wound up going back to the original concept, and I don't know, I just love them so much. I feel like they kind of all evoke the same kind of feeling, but they also are distinct in their own way. So I've been so happy with them.
Great. Yeah. I'm so glad that you get a chance to see it and talk about it, because some authors, I don't think they always get that chance.
So many really don't have a lot to do at all, or anything to do with their covers. And so I feel very fortunate.
And speaking of even more art, your books have generated a lot of fan art, which is always an indication of an especially enthusiastic fan base, which I know that we have at least one image to show today. What's it like to have readers that are so creatively inspired by your work?
It's like the best part, honestly. I feel like when in publishing and in the book world, there's all these like accolades that you're supposed to want, and we do want, like lists and awards and getting on most anticipated stuff and whatever. There's just so many things like that. And really at the end of the day, the thing that none of that really accounts for is readers just being excited about your work. Like you can't make that happen. And so when you do strike a chord with readers, I think it's really special and rare. And if somebody feels connected enough to the work to then create something of their own, that is a really special feeling as an author. And it's like the whole to me, it's like the thing I come back to because I'm very driven, I'm very ambitious. I'm always like hungering for the next thing, and my next like bucket list item as an author or whatever. And when I'm like kind of getting overwhelmed by that stuff, I really do try to come back to those types of things, like readers I've met in person, or, last night at the launch for The Last Legacy, like people who drove hours to be there, because they connected with this world and this thing that was like just inside of me that I put onto paper. And so, like, those types of connections, and fan art is a great example. Those types of connections are just so cool and important, I think, to kind of come back to the like why I'm like doing any of this.
Yeah. And just to have your words have someone else interpret it in this visual, stunning way, it must be, yeah, just incredible.
Yeah, it's also really cool to see how people interpret it. Like I might see it one way in my head, but then to see how someone else kind of saw that scene or that room or that character's face or whatever is really neat too.
So when writing The Last Legacy, what was the most challenging part of writing this particular book?
I was honestly so excited to write it that I didn't struggle in some of the ways I normally do. I think the biggest challenge was the timeline for this project because we decided, I got the green light to write it right after Fable had come out. It had been out for like a month or two. And I had really been wanting to write this book, but we weren't sure I was going to be able to do it. We just wanted to see how the series went and all of that. And so when I finally got the green light, I was like, I could not wait to start working on it because I was just waiting back here to be written. So, I mean, I always have obstacles, but I feel like for this one, the biggest one was just the timeline and making sure that I was able to tell the story I wanted to tell without having as much time to do it as I normally do. Um, so that was kind of intimidating and a little bit scary at times, but in the end I feel like the story wanted to be written really badly, and so it all came together and it really came out the way that I had envisioned it in my head. So I'm so happy about that.
So when you're writing, are you, as they say, a plotter or a pantser? So do you outline the entire thing and then fill it in, or are you kind of like, hey, where do my characters want to go today?
I'm a pantser. I'm definitely a pantser, which is like sometimes with my editor, my agent, or whatever, I'm like, just trust me, and that's probably so scary sometimes for them. But I tend to be very inspired visually by the atmosphere, the setting, the inciting incident, the main character. But I do take time, quite a bit of time on the front end of a story to do like what I call story development, just all in my head. It might be research, it might be like visualizing, it might be just brainstorming on paper, or kind of handwriting out dialogue, that kind of stuff. But or even like things like putting together mood boards on Pinterest or a playlist on Spotify. Those are all part of that like early creative process for me, and I spend quite a bit of time doing that. But when I actually sit down to start typing and drafting the story, I might only know like the first 20 to 30% vaguely of what's going to happen. And then as I start writing, it kind of starts, all the things like the blanks start filling in, and I start seeing like, oh, this is why she's doing that, or oh, that's going to come into play later, or this connects to that, and it just kind of all starts coming together. So it does require a bit of a leap of faith, but I have found that when I try to outline and plan everything out in this very specific way, it always backfires on me. I lose my inspiration. I feel like I already wrote the book, and I'm like, well, I already know what happens now. Like, and then it feels like a drudgery because I'm like, I already know what happens in this scene. Now I have to sit down and write it. It just, something about it for me gets in my head, and I have a lot more fun drafting if I'm discovering along the way.
Did you always want to write for a teen audience? And why did you choose the fantasy genre as your go-to for writing?
I don't know that I always wanted to write for the teen audience. I definitely see myself long term, maybe branching out into different age categories, but I love writing YA. I really, really love it. And I'm so glad that I've started my career in YA and I plan to write YA forever. I just adore it. The reason fantasy in particular really appeals to me and has always appealed to me is that you just are not working with the same restrictions that you do in a lot of genres. Like if you're in contemporary or even like sci-fi, there or contemporary fantasy, contemporary like paranormal. If you're in our world, you are restricted by the rules of our world. So it's not just like geography and things like gravity and all of that stuff, but you are just like there's so much already figured out for you. In fantasy, it just feels like this gigantic playground of the imagination, and things can look however you want. I love developing mythology. I love magic systems, like all of these things that it just feels so fun, and I feel like there's more to discover, and that maybe that even goes into why I love being a discovery writer, and that really appeals to me because it feels more exciting to me. So that's not to say I would never write anything outside of fantasy, because I love reading books like that, and I've worked on projects like that too. But there's something about fantasy that just feels so free when you're actually creating a world.
When you were growing up, did you have any YA writers that were a big influence on your writing?
Yes, so many. I feel like the biggest one is probably Laini Taylor. Her series Daughter of Smoke and Bone was hugely influential on me. I love that series so much. I was just talking about it yesterday and saying I need to reread it. It's been a couple years. I've read it a few times, but it's been a couple years since I've read it again, and I would love to go back and read it again. But she is just such an immersive writer. And I think that when I was an aspiring author and I was, trying to find my voice and trying to, just figure out what my thing was, I was so inspired by her work because I felt like it really stood apart from a lot of the trends at that time. Not just in the story itself and what kind of story she was telling, and the characters and all of that is so unique, that story, especially for the time it came out. But her prose, like her voice, her prose were just so special and still is. And so I think I drew a lot of inspiration from her.
She's one of the best.
Mm-hmm.
So Fable was actually chosen as a Reese YA book club pick. How did you feel when you got that news?
Like they made a mistake. I was like, what? Are you sure? And I had heard that they might start a YA line because it was only, I think, maybe the second pick.
Yeah.
So it was new. By the time I found out, they hadn't even announced their first pick. And so I just thought that was such like a dream come true. There being in a big book club like that is just one of the cream of the crop type goals as an author, or maybe not even goals, but opportunities, I should say. It's just such an amazing opportunity to find readers and for people to run across your books that otherwise wouldn't have. And I love Reese's Book Club and like their mission, their vision, and their purpose, like what they're setting out to do by elevating women voices and all of that. So it felt like such an honor to be included with them. And it has been, it's provided this whole new experience as an author to be, have all this exposure that I otherwise wouldn't have had. So it's been a really, really cool experience.
Wonderful. Can you tell us about anything that you have coming up?
No, not really. I'm like, man, I'm in the black hole of like information right now because I have several really exciting things happening and I can't talk about any of them. And so I'm really hoping that I can soon. The one thing that has been announced that is kind of a different kind of thing is that I recently sold a nonfiction project called The Storyteller's
I
Workbook.
want to explore the foundational aspects of really connecting to your writing. What you won't find in this workshop are simple formulas or step-by-step guides. We are going hunting for what lies within. This will be a journey of self-discovery to find your unique voice as a writer.
It's a writing tool for writers. It's a big workbook. It's all illustrated. It's really beautiful. And I partnered with Isabel Ibanez on it. She's the illustrator and designer for it. And it's kind of inspired and based on my writing workshop, Writing with the Soul, where it's very writer-led and kind of the no rules type approach to writing, and kind of this internally guided, I should say, approach to writing a full novel, even down to like titling it and things like that. So I'm super excited about that project. That was just announced, and I'll be working on that over the next year. It's supposed to come out in 2023, but I do have several fiction projects coming up that I'm so excited about. I'm drafting one of them right now that I can't wait until they take the gag order off so that I could just like shout it from the rooftops.
I know that's always, it's always asked of authors, what do you have coming up? And it's almost always, nope, I can't tell you about it quite yet.
Oh, it's so frustrating because you just want to like talk about it and readers want to know, and you want readers also to know, like what's coming up. But then, it's not just you anymore. It's like your whole team, a sales team, a marketing team, like all these people who are like all working together. And so it can get kind of hairy. So hopefully soon I will have a lot to talk about, and I'll just have to cross my fingers it comes sooner rather than later.
Well, that's news just in itself that you have a lot coming up that you can't talk about yet. So
yeah, it is.
That's great. I just wanted to thank Adrienne for joining us today, and to HEC Media and The Novel Neighbor. And remember, you can purchase The Last Legacy at thenovelneighbor.com. And thank you all for watching.
Thank you so much for having me. So this excerpt is from chapter 3, the end of chapter 3 of The Last Legacy. And after Brynn starts realizing that she may have gotten herself into more of a situation than she realized with her family. And she says, I wasn't a fool. I'd known when I got off that ship at the docks that joining the Roths wouldn't be as simple as taking my mother's chair at the table. I'd counted on the fact that to them, family was everything. It was the net that would catch me if I made a mistake or if I fell from grace. But there was a clear line drawn between those who belonged and those who didn't. It would take more than blood to cross it.